Chapter 2 Wake. A book flew out of Twilight's room, clattering on the stairs to join a massive pile of similarly discarded books that lay on piles scattered across the floor. The only sounds that came from within the eerily quiet library was a shuffling of pages and the frustrated groans of the lavender unicorn that inhabited the place. Another book flew out of Twilight's room, this time tossed out the window to join another pile of books just outside the library. Inside, the lavender mare was lying on her bed, flipping through another book before throwing it away and grunting angrily. She had gone through everything, from legends to cooking. Not a single one, scroll or book, mentioned anything about the USS Vector. Even then, her assumptions were correct, since a few books mentioned a mathematical concept with the same name. Twilight let out a groan as her head sunk into her pillow. She had not managed to get any sleep at all, as she had been instead focusing on her search for the answers. This vector could be a danger to Equestria, she told herself. It could require the use of the elements of harmony, and if it destroyed Equestria, it's going to be my fault. The lavender mare was deep in her session of thought when her purple draconic assistant walked in the room holding a plate with a daisy sandwich on it. He made his way through the heaps of books and placed the plate on the bed next to Twilight, who still had her head stuck in a pillow. Twilight, Spike poked her. Twilight, you have to eat something. You've been up for hours. Besides, every pony's been told to go to the town hall. They said it was something really important. The unicorn lifted her head and levitated the sandwich, taking a bite of it. Fine. If the world ends because of me... I'm sure it won't, Twilight. Spike shakily rubbed his claws and walked out of the room, Twilight levitating the sandwich alongside of her as she followed him. He muttered under his breath, At least, I don't think it'll be your fault. They made their way through the field of books and emerged outside the front door. The vector was eclipsing the sun, casting the town into darkness and taking away some of the happy, optimistic essence that it normally possessed. Twilight and Spike walked through the empty streets, noticing that some of the windows and even some of the doors had been barred with planks. The food stands usually decorating the streets taken away, leaving nothing aside from the dust settling on the street. Twilight looked up at this so-called vector, causing her to gulp as chills ran down her back. Even after all this time, it hadn't moved a single inch. They both made their way to the town center, where almost all of the Ponyville's inhabitants had gathered. The podium had been set up right in front of Town Hall, but it was vacant. Twilight emerged into the crowd with Spike on her back as they pushed past the ponies in order to get as close to the building as possible. Only a few minutes passed before Mare approached the podium and cleared her throat, making every pony stand attentively as the cacophony of worried voices died down. My dear and beloved friends, residents of Ponyville, I am here to tell you that I have received a letter from Princess Celestia. The crowd was swept in a wave of whispers as the mare opened said letter. She cleared her throat. Dear citizens of Equestria, my little ponies, I am more than ashamed to announce that despite our negotiations, the kingdom of Griffos has declared war on us. Sharp gasps broke the silence that had built up, but the mare had only took a deep breath to regain her composure and continued, this time louder. They have taken a population of Pegasus ponies captive. These ponies immigrated to their lands for the sole purpose of making a home for themselves there, and now have been enslaved. It is likely that they have already begun building their armies, and we must keep pace. They are no strangers to conflict, and as such, I would imagine that it will not be long before they begin to advance. We ponies, on the other hoof, have always been a very peaceful race. A conflict such as this happening more than 1,000 years ago. However, due to these recent events, our time of peace is coming to an end. Griffins may interpret our desire to avoid fighting as weakness, but we will show them otherwise. For the sake of everything we hold dear, we will need to prepare ourselves for the inevitable battles to come. There will be a recruitment center open in every city, town, and settlement, and the ponies chosen to form the new army of Equestria are asked to report to the nearest center to receive their instructions and training. Additionally, Every pony who desires to willingly enlist and fight in the defense of our nation may simply walk into the recruitment center alongside those who have already been called upon. In the bigger cities such as Camelot, Manhattan, Philadelphia, Huffington, Cloudsdale, Stalingrad, and Shroudingham, those who are called to service will receive a letter instead of being addressed directly. This will be a time of great suffering, I understand that, and I am very sorry. But the suffering will only continue for as long as we allow it, and we will rise against them. We will rise up and show them that we are not the inferior race they believe us to be. To this end, we must fight. We must fight for ourselves, our families, our foes, and for the ponies within Griffos. We must fight so that those we love may see the tomorrow. The mare took a deep breath and adjusted her glasses. And addressing the issue about the USS Vector, which is currently floating above the Equestrian sky, all I can say is that nothing like it has ever been known to exist before. We have done all the research we could, but to no avail. There is no mention of such a thing in our records. Yet I promise you, both my sister and I will make sure that it does not cause any harm. Whatever its purpose is, it will have to go through us before anything else. Mare sighed and took a step down from the podium, a royal guard taking the spotlight soon after. "Citizens," he called, his voice gruff and loud. "The recruitment center will be held inside the town hall. We will now begin calling the names of those who have been chosen to form the new Equestrian army." The guard took a scroll out of his saddlebag, unrolled it, and began reading aloud. "Berry punch, caramel apple, carrot cake, bonbon." As they were called, the ponies walked into the town hall. Some of them were hesitant, and others refused to accept the fact that they would soon have to leave their loved ones behind. Carrot Cake stood in front of the guard, giving him a pleading look.
"Please, sir, I have two foals. I can't leave them."
The guard shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's nothing I can do. Now please, go into the town hall." Carrot Cake opened his mouth to say something, but quickly frowned and walked into the building, defeated. Twilight had reunited with her friends after Mare finished redacting the letter. The 6 mares and Spike watched silently as the ponies formed a line and walked into the town hall.
"Do you think they'll pick any of us?"
Rainbow Dash broke the silence and turned to face the other ponies.
I really hope they don't,"
said Rarity. The mares continued to look at the guard while he continued reading the list. "Carrot Top, Applejack." Applejack's eyes widened, and her friends moved closer to her with worried expressions, but froze as the list continued. "Rainbow Dash, Twilight Sparkle, Pinkie Pie, Rarity, and lastly, Fluttershy." With that, the guard placed the scroll back into his saddlebag and kept observing the crowd of ponies that had significantly diminished in numbers. Most of the stallion and mares who had not been called into service started walking back to their homes. The few that remained were deep in thought. Some looked at the ground, others at the sky, and some of them apparently had zoned out. After a few moments, half of them slowly began walking towards the town hall, while a couple other of them shook their heads and joined the others in returning to their homes. Among the ponies who had decided to enlist was Big Macintosh. Applejack noticed that her brother had just finished talking to the guard and was starting to head into the town hall. She frowned and she ran towards him. She drifted to a stop between her brother and the building, giving him a burning glare.
"Just what do you think y'all doing? Y'all gonna enlist? What about the farm? And Apple Bloom? I was just called, and if you enlist, there ain't gonna be no point to take care of the farm or our little sister."
The soft-spoken stallion slowly looked down at her sister and scowled. "Sis, I don't expect y'all to understand, but I have to do this. Why? 'Cause then there'll be one more stallion between us and Griffos, and our little sister. One more stallion between them and Ponyville. It's the best I can do for our town, our farm, and our sister. The folk that stay here during all this will take care of our fillies and colts, and the military itself will take care of the farm to help supply the troops. In the end, the way I see it, Each of us has to sacrifice something or do something, because in the end, it'll pay off. It's what I gotta do. Applejack averted her eyes from her brother. Somewhere deep down, she knew that he was right. Her life had been simple. She had grown up on a farm. She lived there. She worked there. She got her food from there. During the cowmare's peaceful life, war had only been an old mare's tale, and now it was here, and it was calling to her. She would have to leave everything behind. Her life, her family, but she had to, because it was the best thing she could do for them. Wasn't it? AJ. The orange mare turned to her right. Twilight and the rest of her friends were standing next to her.
Girls, I'm having trouble letting it sink in, Zal.
I know. I mean, we knew Griffins really didn't like us that much, but I was just hoping that the princess could keep them away. Twilight bit her lip and looked at the town hall. Rarity shook her head.
But why us? I can't go to war. It involves getting dirty, and I'm not a fighter. None of us are. Perhaps Rainbow or Applejack, but hardly any pony in all of Equestria is fit for this.
The guard who had been listening in approached the group. Soldiers are made, not born. Now go. Now please, go to the recruitment center. The 6 mares shared concerned looks and slowly trotted into the building. What do you mean by that? The Admiral asked, rubbing his head with one hand. He found himself standing next to one of the many workers in the command bridge, not long after he had woken up. His most recent memory was of the hyperspace jump, then all he could remember was falling limply onto the metallic floor of the Vector, before waking up with a painful headache. He looked at the view screens surrounding the chamber, which displayed a blue sky and a large expanse of land, covered by vegetative life. It was obvious to him. Something had gone wrong. I'm not sure, sir, the technician replied, busily typing into his console while shooting worried glances at the Admiral. Unless our sensors are malfunctioning, the sun is orbiting this planet. Becker slowly turned to the man. How many Gs? Standard 1, sir. The man typed into the console, bringing up measurements of the composition of the planet's atmosphere. More than enough oxygen to support compatible life forms, and the humidity levels indicate presence of water. So it's Earth-like. Admiral Becker stepped away from the console, looking at the main view screen and sighing. Can you raise high command? Negative, sir. Atlas opened his eyes, and his senses were instantly overwhelmed by a massive headache. After recalling the events from before, he opened the hatch of the tube and climbed out of it. He looked around the chamber and noticed that the trooper in charge of launch chambers was flying face first onto the floor. He knelt down next to him and shook the man's shoulder. Hey, you okay? He asked. The trooper groaned in response, and Atlas shook him again. A few moments later, the trooper began to wake up. Ah, he said, standing up and holding his head. Sir, he groaned. What happened? My head is killing me. I think we passed out during a hyperspace jump. Atlas checked his suit's display. It's been about 14 hours. The soldier responded with a disgruntled groan. Atlas peeked out of the chamber. Several soldiers were lying on the floor, unconscious. A few had already woken up and had been set on the task of getting the others up. He walked into the main hallway, which was soon filled with groans and moans made by the soldiers that were starting to get up. Fortunately, none of them seemed to have been hurt during the jump. Everyone just seemed to have a very bad headache. While he was walking, Atlas noticed a group of soldiers staring through a window and quickly being joined by more and more soldiers. He calmly walked over to the group and took a look outside. He squinted at first, the light making his head throb, but soon his eyes adapted to the brightness. The Vector was floating dangerously close to the surface of a planet. It was filled with vegetation. Every inch of the surface that wasn't covered in green pastures and hills was instead covered in forest that extended as far as the eye could see. Mountains adorned the majority of the surrounding area, and in the distance there was a massive cluster of clouds. But these clouds had a rainbow waterfall going down them. You know, Atlas thought, the more I look at it, the weirder it gets. The trees that covered the land seemed to be mostly pine trees. It would have been completely normal if pine trees hadn't gone extinct 500 years ago. Looking back at the clouds, Atlas could see that they had some buildings on them, which seemed to be made of clouds as well, completely slapping physics in the face. Other than that, this was clearly not the barren planet that Zeta 20 was orbiting. One of the soldiers shook his head. You know what? We're delirious because of the headaches. How about we just don't give a damn? The rest of the group, including Atlas, nodded in response. A few of them responded with, let's go with that. Yeah, why not? And so on. Atlas sighed. He decided to make his way back to the command bridge. While walking through the long hallways of the Vector, he noticed that everyone had already woken up, for the most part, and were now helping those who had suffered consciousness upon losing consciousness and collapsing to the floor. It seemed like everyone had decided to just disregard the surroundings of the Vector, and instead opted to keep themselves busy with something. There were a few exceptions, of course. Some of the soldiers could not bring themselves to do anything other than gaze at the strange cloud city, but nonetheless, everyone kept shooting glances every once in a while. Atlas was not sure whether to be amused or worried at the strange anomaly. By all means, something strange was happening, and he needed some answers. After having made his way to the tram station, Atlas was thankful to find that it was at least only partially full. He walked into the tram, and the door closed behind him before it began to move through the tunnels and ran across the entire ship. Once the tram reached full speed, Atlas realized that he was actually completely alone, so he decided to move to the tram's windows to look outside. The tram's panoramic windows allowed those riding to see the sections that they were passing through. Often it would enter a tunnel and re-emerge in some other area of the ship. At the moment, it was going through the factory complex, which contained several machines, from small to massive, that built even larger machines. Conveyor belts would transport bits that would gradually be shaped to become parts of military vehicles, weapons, armor, and pretty much anything else the crew of the Vector might need. Several of the workers could be seen helping each other up, and the factory itself was inactive, as it was only set in that state when more vehicles and weapons were needed. After overlooking the factory, the tram went into a tunnel again, before emerging once more, showing a view of the hangar bay instead. In the hangar, the same situation could be observed, the pilots waking each other up, while others were making sure the ship was still intact. The tram entered another tunnel, and shortly after, it reached the station on the command bridge. It opened its doors, and Atlas walked out, heading into the bridge. Inside, the crew had suffered the same fate as those on the rest of the ship. The few that had already regained their senses were helping the others up. The ones that still remained unattended were at their workstations, looking like they had fallen asleep on their heads on the consoles. In front of the main window, Admiral Becker was idly chatting with one of Atlas's roommates, Taurus. Taurus was a raider, slim and agile troopers often filing scouting roles. Raiders were usually women, as they possessed a slimmer, more agile figure compared to the common trooper. Even if they were not required to perform the 6-year campaign on guard, women were not an unusual sight. Raiders were widely known for being one of the most respected divisions of the CG, as they were as capable, and in most cases, more so than the common trooper, despite the fact that women could not be augmented as far as men. The armor of a raider was similar to the armor of a common trooper, except lighter. On their backs were 2 razor-sharp wings, often used to sever limbs, and for extra maneuverability when flying in the atmosphere. At the sound of the loud footsteps behind them, both Admiral and Taurus turned around.
Ah, Atlas, those footsteps really aren't helping with my headache, Taurus complained.
Oh, please. Do you think that I was all dandy on the way here? At least I'm starting to feel better. Atlas then turned to the Admiral. So, where are we? The old man sighed, turning to the window. I have absolutely no idea. We are above an uncharted planet, inhabited by who knows what. Atlas huffed. I also saw a city made of clouds. You're not the only one, the Admiral sighed. There's also something strange going on with this planet's sun. The orbital pattern's all wrong. The sensors show that it's orbiting the planet, but that can't be. There's also a strange energy field surrounding it. We haven't been able to put our finger on it, but it may be the reason we all fainted. I'm starting to think that some of our sensors burnt out. What? And that's not even the end of it, the Admiral continued, unfazed. We've lost all contact with the rest of the fleet. We'll just have to wait until we map the stars to know exactly where we are. The trio was struck with a wave of silence. Atlas sighed. Well, what do we do now? The Admiral pointed at the main virtual window. Directly under the ship, a large city was built into the side of a mountain, and in the middle of the cityscape stood a large castle. Since we're pretty much stuck here, we might as well make ourselves comfortable. We're going to have to initiate first contact and find out who lives in this place. But you're not going into that city. There's a small village nearby, and if whatever lives in this place is dangerous, you'll have a better chance of escaping a village rather than a city. Taurus stepped up to the Admiral. Hold on. Who do you mean by you? You, Atlas, and Mac. Taurus cocked her head to the side. Why us? It's just first contact. I don't want to get the rest of the crew stirred up just yet. Just go there, find out what's below us, and get back. Mac can also take some DNA samples if necessary. This is a level 1 operation, you know the drill. You don't tell anything to anyone unless you have my permission. Atlas huffed. Yes, sir. The Admiral nodded. Now go. Mac is waiting for you with a dropship. Taurus and Atlas walked back to the bridge and into the tram station, boarding the trams. The Admiral walked over to his console and held down a button. Attention! This is your Admiral speaking. As you may have noticed, we are above an uncharted world right now. We've lost all contact with the fleet, and we don't know what our exact location is. But we will find a way to make it back. Stay safe, soldiers. After giving his speech, the Admiral sighed and looked back to the main window. Sir? A voice came from Becker's right. He shot a glance to his side, discovering an armored man had approached him, then resumed to gaze out the window. Yes, Commander. Those two that you were talking to, they do not show up on my visor. And let's keep it that way, Admiral said. The man sighed. Will do, sir. The Vector had regained its normal levels of activity. Everyone was feeling uneasy, but most of the ship's crew managed to keep themselves busy in a bid to set any uncomforting thoughts aside. Most of the crew had decided to stick to the first contact protocols and refrain from asking any questions. It helped keep some of the pressure off of them. Atlas and Taurus walked out of the tram and began to make their way down the hall that led to the hangar. Do you think we'll make it back? Asked Taurus. Atlas shrugged. I try not to think about it. Right, she sighed. I wonder what lives down there. It's all so Earth-like. Well, I'm just hoping it ain't dangerous. Both of the troopers walked into the hangar. On the ceiling, several rails kept fighters, interceptors, and bombers stacked neatly, while some of them remained on the landing pads, ready to depart when needed. Most of the pilots were chatting with one another. Others were playing card games or performing maintenance on their vehicles. Some of the pilots shot some odd glances at the two as they made their way through. Hey, Taurus looked up at Atlas. Whatever happens, you've got each other's back, right? The giant nodded. You can count on me. On the central landing pad, Mac was standing next to the dropship, waving at Atlas and Taurus before walking up the ramp and into it. All right, how should we do this? Asked Taurus. I say we keep it simple. We land nearby, then walk up to the town, stop at the entrance, and wait for something to happen. Good enough for me, she added. The two walked into the ship, and the hatch closed behind them. Mac was in the cockpit, getting ready to pilot the transport vessel. Mac, land us in the main road that leads to the village. Make sure that there's about 50 meters between them and us. Don't want to take any chances. Atlas held onto the railings on the ceiling, using them to support himself. The dropship's engines fired up and lifted it off the landing pad. A small black dot flew out of the vector. Derbyhose was lying on a cloud as she tried to align her eyes to get a better view of it. She closed her right eye and looked at it with the other one, noticing that the dot had gotten considerably bigger.
Uh-oh.
She leapt off the cloud and began to fly towards Ponyville as fast as she could. This was her moment. If she could not warn every pony in time, they would all suffer a terrible, terrible fate. While in deep thought, though, she crash-landed into a fountain next to the town hall. Ignoring the pain, she pointed towards the dot, which was not a dot anymore, but a creature, contraption, flying thing.
It's here! It's here! It's here to take us! Every pony run! She yelled,
but her words were muffled since she had yet to take her head out of the water. All the ponies nearby turned to the fountain, then to where the mailman was pointing. Many of them gasped as they noticed the metallic machine landing on the road that led to town. They began screaming and running in every direction, getting into whatever place they could to hide from the monster. In mere seconds, the streets were empty. The dropship touched the ground, and its engines turned off. Slowly, the hatch opened, allowing those inside to take a look at the village. Looks like a ghost town," said Atlas.
"I think that whatever lives here is downright scared of us."
Taurus stepped out of the ship, followed by Atlas and Mac. They started walking towards town. Not a single sound could be heard besides their footsteps. Many of those houses had planks covering the windows. The architecture of the buildings was almost worthy of a fairy tale, being extremely colorful. One of the buildings even appeared to be made of gingerbread. The trio of bipeds neared the center of town. They felt like dozens of eyes were watching their every move. As they stopped walking, Atlas turned to face his two companions. "And now, we wait, I guess." Applebloom and the Cutie Mark Crusaders were hiding in a bush near Carousel Boutique, silently observing the three creatures that walked into town. The three creatures stopped. The one in the middle turned to the others and said something, to which they responded with a nod. They were tall, taller than Celestia and Luna. They stood on their hind legs and had claws on their forelegs, like dragons, except their claws weren't sharp and seemed to have rounded tips instead. They had no fur and no skin. Their bodies were covered by a metallic set of armor, perhaps something like a shell. Despite those common traits, each of the creatures were substantially different from the other two. The one in the middle was enormous. Its bulky figure was almost completely covered in a dark gray set of armor. The few exposed areas of their body showed some form of tissue, seemingly made of some fibers that interlocked with each other, resembling muscle, but the disturbing part was that the color was also dark gray. It had a single orange slit for an eye, and lacked a mouth. In fact, none of them had mouths. The one on the left was very different. Its outer shell glowed blue several places, and its color was shiny silver. The parts that did not have a shell over them also appeared to be muscle, but it was much, much different from the one in the middle. The muscles on this one were also metallic, like the rest of its body, and they were made of several parts that folded into each other, creating something that looked like muscle. Its eyes glowed blue, like the rest of its body complex. The one on the right had to be the most different. Its body was very slim. The shell covered its entire form, leaving no spot exposed. The most interesting feature it had was the set of wings on its back. Unlike those of a Pegasus, they had no feathers, and they were sharp and metallic like the rest of its body. However, it did not have eyes. Instead, its face was a round and completely orange dome. It had no features whatsoever, and faintly shone with the light. The first two were carrying blunt sticks on their back, while the slimmer one was carrying two abstract objects on its sides. Applebloom gulped, and then whispered,
"What are they?" "I have no idea. They look kind of scary. Not that I'm scared or anything,"
responded Scootaloo. Sweetie Belle and Applebloom shot her a glance.
"What? It's true,"
she said.
"Why aren't they doing anything? They even look, I don't know, bored," said Sweetie Belle. "I think they're just waiting for us. I mean, the same thing happened with Sakura. Maybe they just want to talk or buy something, like Sakura," said Applebloom.
Scootaloo huffed.
"Yeah, right. Why don't you go to talk to them then?" "You know,"
Applebloom stood up.
"I think I will. They're not doing anything, and if they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it already. If it weren't for me, we wouldn't have never met Sakura, and maybe I'll even earn my cutie mark."
She smiled at the Pegasus and Unicorn and hopped out of the bush. She began to trot towards the three creatures, who had started talking to each other, looking away from the direction Applebloom was. As she got closer to them, she immediately started regretting her decision, as they turned out to be much larger than she had originally thought. They must have heard her approach, because they had turned around and were looking down at her. She froze and skidded to a halt in front of the bigger one, who towered over her. She slowly looked up at a single orange eye that stared at her unexpressively. She carefully gave the creature a sheepish grin, while simultaneously breaking out into a cold sweat. Atlas turned around when he heard something running towards him. He saw nothing until he looked down and saw a tiny yellow creature with red hair and a pink bow and big round eyes was giving him a wide, awkward grin, while starting to shake, most likely out of fear. He wasn't sure what to make of it. For all he knew, it could be dangerous, but it didn't look like it. As the creature's big, round, frightened eyes looked up at him, a wave of compassion washed over him. Slowly, he kneeled down, the sound caused by the servos on his armor making the little creature even more afraid. He slowly examined it. It was not as alien as he thought the creatures of this world would be. Looking back at the first contact protocols the USC had taught him, he realized he had to make the creature know he was not actually going to hurt it. He extended his right arm slowly. The creature tried to hide its fear, but kept glancing back and forth between his hand and his face. As he moved his hand closer, it got to a point where the creature simply froze, the wide grin still on its face. Gently, he rubbed one of its ears on his fingers. The creature still frozen in place. Afterwards, he began to gently scratch his head, and the creature closed its eyes. Its hollow grin was replaced with a real one. It started giggling. As it started giggling, behind his visor, he smiled. "Cute little thing, isn't it?"
It tickles,
the creature said, causing Atlas to stop scratching its head. "Hold on. You can speak Terran?" he said. Immediately afterwards, the creature spoke up.
"Wait, y'all can speak Equestrian?"
Taurus clapped her hands together.
"Oh, it's so cute!"
Atlas looked at Taurus while chuckling. "First time I've seen you act, girly." He then looked at the little creature again. "Well, hi, my name's Atlas. Do you have a name?"
"My name's Applebloom. Pleased to meet you, mister." "Wait, you're Mister, right?"
said the little creature, Applebloom. Atlas decided it was better not to ask about the names. At least, not yet. Atlas scratched Applebloom's head once again. "Yeah, I'm a mister. Glad someone decided to come out and say hi."
"Yeah, they're just scared 'cause y'all big and stuff. But y'all ain't bad. You're just scary is all. You're big and y'all stand weird and you..."
Applebloom trailed off and waved at some bushes. Two of the little creatures emerged from them and began walking towards the group. Atlas chuckled and looked at the two creatures that were approaching them. One of them was orange and had purple hair, and the other one was white and had pink and purple hair. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that the white one had a horn, and the orange one had wings. He looked back at Applebloom. "Friends of yours?"
Yup, Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle," she said.
Scootaloo walked right over to Taurus, and Sweetie Belle awkwardly placed herself next to Mac, who just observed her.
Hello, mister."
Mac kneeled down. "Interesting. Equine anatomy. Small size. And, horn. Do you happen to be a unicorn?" His voice sounded distorted. Sweetie Belle gulped.
Yeah. Is something wrong with your voice?"
"Would you believe me if I told you I was a robot?"
"What's a robot?"
Sweetie Belle rubbed her hooves together, looking up at Mac. "Never mind. What's your name?"
"Sweetie Belle," she said, smiling at him.
"Sweetie Belle, I am Mac2945, but you can just refer to me as Mac."
Hi, Mac."
The ambience between the two became awkwardly silent for a couple of minutes, especially since Mac was staring a hole straight into Sweetie Belle. "Tell me about your species. I see you are a unicorn, but your friend has wings, and the other does not have any of those," he said.
Well, we're ponies. There's unicorn ponies, Pegasus ponies, and earth ponies."
"Earth ponies. Interesting." After his statement, he noticed how awkward the unicorn seemed to feel. "Is something wrong?" he inquired. Sweetie Belle looked up at him.
No."
"You stuttered. There must be something bothering you. Am I boring you?" he said bluntly.
No, it's fine," she said.
"I must be boring you. I will try to be more funny or entertaining." Mac then looked around. After aimlessly glancing around for a couple seconds, he looked back at the little unicorn. I give up. This is really not my specialty, he said. Also, may I have some of your hair? Atlas shuffled his fingers together. Can I ask you a few things?
Sure.
She sat on her haunches and smiled up at him. What are your species called? Is there a leader or some other figure I can talk to around here? Preferably someone who knows a lot of stuff. And finally, is the rest of your race the same size as you?
Applebloom raised an eyebrow. We're called ponies. There are 3 types of ponies. Earth ponies, Pegasus ponies, and unicorn ponies. I think y'all want to talk to Twilight Sparkle. She knows a lot of stuff. And I think she's like very close to the princess. And what was the last question? Ah, yeah. I'm just a filly. I gotta go to school and all.
That's very interesting. Say, where is this Twilight Sparkle? He placed both of his hands on his knees.
Twilight? Oh, she's with my sister. The rest of her friends are out on the farm. They said something about spending lots of time together today. Also, where did you come from?
We came from a very faraway land, using that thing floating above us. It's called the Vector. Behind his faceplate, he bit his lip, hoping that Applebloom would refrain from asking much more. She looked up.
The Vector? You came from that? Whoa. Hey, what's that thing on your back?
Atlas was taken aback by the question. It probably wouldn't be a good idea to talk about his rifle. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but can you lead us to this Twilight Sparkle of yours? And the thing on my back is something really hard to explain.
Just tell me what it's for, please.
Applebloom looked up at him with puppy dog eyes. Fine. It's a sword. Yeah, a blade comes out of the end. Why did I bring it with me? Well, we didn't really know what lives here, so we could have been attacked. Can we please go now? The little filly tilted her head to the side.
That's one weird sword. Anyway, come on, let's go.
Atlas nodded. He stood up and turned back to his companions. Cedarville was awkwardly talking to Mac, and Turris was talking to, or rather, being bombarded with questions from an eager Scootaloo. Taurus, Mac, we're going to Applebloom's farm. She says there's someone there who can get us up to speed. As the 3 creatures and the little crusaders walked out of town, the ponies who had been hiding inside their houses began to walk about, observing the group as they walked away. After seeing the group walk past the flying contraption the creatures had brought with them, and instead heading towards the Sweet Apple Acres, the gathering townspeople sighed in relief and shared some worried glances afterward.